we're sat here in your front room or your observing room, Yaxley in Peterborough, and we've really come down today to find out exactly how you do it. Now, I want to have a long talk to you today, and I want to try and pry some of your secrets from you.
Yes.
I think that many people in this country, many amateur astronomers, have always looked up to you as being something of a living legend, and I hope we're going to be able to get some of your secrets off you today. But before we get to the astronomical part of your life, I'd like to sort of start at your very beginnings and ask you really about your childhood and your schooling, if you want to go back.
Well, I suppose the very first thing I can remember was a very, very big partial eclipse of the sun, when about 90% of the sun was covered by the moon, almost at midday, and we were taken out in the yard with the usual smoked glass to look at it on a day very similar to what we've got here now, cloudless, one of those eclipses which actually took place in fine weather, and that really started me off. And then
how old were you then, George?
I would be then about 10, I think, or 9.
And what sort of school was it?
It was a council school, an ordinary council school in those days.
And this was in Peterborough?
In Peterborough, yes, because I've always lived here within a short distance of this house all my life, except when it was necessary to leave to get a job somewhere else temporarily, you see. But and then in 1924, Rutherford split the atom at Cambridge and frightened the daylights out of all of us. And that same year, Mars made a very close approach to the Earth.
Yeah.
And you know that the craze was in those days, Canali had been named by Schiaparelli, the Italian. He used the word Canali, and of course they believed then that there was life on the planet, and these canals had been made by intelligent beings, you see. Lowell had supported that theory all his observing career, which amazed me, because I've never seen any canali on the planet at all myself that looks like anything like it, you see. Well, then I had a chance from my Sunday school teacher to have a 2-inch telescope which had a very dark glass. So we were able to see, I was able to see the sunspots. And then during the years that I had it, about 3 or 4 years I had that telescope in my possession, I was able to see the first solar maximum of the sun, 1926. And it was a double maximum because it repeated itself again in 1928. There was a double hump. And I had this telescope all the time that I was there, that I was using it.
So you're drawing sunspots there?
I was drawing sunspots then quite frequently.
Still in your early teens then?
I was still in my early teens, yes. And then about 1928, the boy next door found out that another friend of his mother's and father had a 4-inch Cook refractor in the bottom of his garden, about 2/3 of a mile away.
Yeah.
And he said, would I like to go and look at it? Well, of course I would, you see, because I'd never seen a telescope of any size at all before that. And so we went down there on a pouring rainy night, which we'd arranged to see. So of course, like everything else, we couldn't see a thing when we got there.
Typical.
And we found that the observatory was at the bottom of this gentleman's garden, who got quite a bit of money because he was a director of one of the firms that were making bricks in Peterborough. And he took us down, and he said I would be welcome to come back, and he'd lend me the key, and I'd go down and look at his telescope any time. So I went back again, and I was very interested. Of course, it's the first time I'd ever seen craters on the moon and things like that. And so he gave me the key and said I could use the telescope from then on.
Right.
Because he wasn't using it at all. He wasn't very interested in it. So I went down there day and night when I was free to use it, and I made my first drawings of the lunar craters, which were published in the local press, above all things. Yes, I've still got a print upstairs with them in a copy upstairs. And so I was able to use that telescope from about 19 29 until about 1936 I used that telescope, until I got a 4-inch telescope from the BAA.
Just to go back to your schooling, George, was there any science teaching at school? Was there anything that brought you into astronomy as a science?
Well,
or was it your own?
No, it was purely my own interest. My father just had this 1.25-inch telescope, which probably I used before I had this 2.5-inch telescope from this Sunday school teacher. But it was only that, and it was with that telescope, the 2-inch telescope, that I first plotted the stars in Cygnus in that rich area below Gamma, where there's hundreds of stars, and I plotted those, and I made lots of sketches for this Sunday school teacher to see, you see. And unfortunately his elder mother put them on the fire by mistake, so all my observations first. But I still have one of my first drawings, and that was when Will Hay discovered the white spot on Saturn in 1933. I've still got the original pencil sketch somewhere upstairs of the white spot discovered by Will Hay in 1933.
Marvelous.
When Saturn was in a very similar part of the sky as it is now, because in my career as an astronomer, Saturn has just gone round the whole sky twice. So that tells you how old I am, you see. It's 30 years it takes to go round once, you see, so it's gone round twice in my astronomical career.
As a young boy then, you were obviously interested in doing astronomy. Were there any other interests outside astronomy?
Not a great deal, because my father had a large allotment, and although I had 2 brothers, they never left a fork or a rake or anything else, and I had the job to clean it and do it, you see, for him, you see, so I had to do the hard, rough grind. So we spent most of the time working. Now in 1930, I think it was December the 27th, 1930, I was walking across the river bridge in Peterborough one night to go to a youth meeting, and a brilliant fireball shot down in the northwestern sky, coming from the northeast. I should think it would be equal to the brightness of Venus. And this interested me because I had Norton's Star Atlas. I had already got Norton's Star Atlas, and I knew most of the sky in Norton's Star Atlas even then. And I wrote to the director of the Meteor section. I had no idea where he lived, so I had to write to the BAA or something like that to get his address, and it was some time before he answered. And then it was JPM Prentice at Stowmarket, and he asked me if I would start observing for him. But I was still at the City of Leeds Training College doing term time, so it wasn't until the summer of 1931 that I began to do meteor observing for him in a good scale. And we were using charts to draw meteors on in those days, which he didn't like the idea at all. He was already using the whole of the sky field with the naked eye, and he knew the names of the stars, so he was able to plot them straight away without drawing them out, you see. And he thought we were losing a lot of accuracy by taking a mind off and putting a line on the chart. And he was amazed that I knew the sky sufficiently well from the very start to be able to plot the meteors by his method, because all I got to do was to learn off the numbers of the stars. But I had Norton's Star Atlas on the plate, you see. It had one advantage in meteor work: that it was not costly. It was cheap. And I couldn't afford anything because I was out of work. It only needed an old alarm clock and a pencil and a board and a paper, and that's all you required. And so we, from 1932, I was very fortunate in seeing the quadrantid maximum when the hourly rate got up to about 60 to 70 an hour by dawn. I was also near the railway main line to London, the East Coast main line, and in those days, of course, it was all steam. So the headmaster in the school I was at said I wasn't seeing meteors at all. I was just seeing the cinders from the express trains, because as they left Peterborough, the fireman was always shoveling the next 100-weight of coal on, and they were flying up in the air, and so nobody believed I was seeing meteors. They all thought I was seeing just cinders from these trains, you see. So
I remember asking you once before about your sort of magnificent memory, and you told me that it was really started with you at school when you.
Yes, it did. It started at school with the head at that school, and he wasn't concerned with this fancy imaginary sketching today. You had to draw what he put on the table in front of you, and the boys all sat round in a circle, and he put, say, an attache case and a book, and he went, and so when you're drawing your attache case in the book, he came round and said, "Boy, use your eyes, look at that bit just there, you see." So you learned. The next week, of course, you expected something else, but no, there was the attache case and the book, and the next week after that, there was the attache case and the book. And it went on for about 6 weeks, until now I can, as I'm talking to you, I can still see that attache case and book. Then after that, he gave you, say, a top coat and a scarf to draw, see, and then probably a cup and saucer and 2 glasses, see, to get the light and dark on it. And I can say honestly that out of his class of 30, about 25 could draw well by the time, because you use your eyes, boy. You must use your eyes, you see.
The lesson in objectivity then, was it?
Yes, so that when I started to draw the craters on the moon, I had no difficulty in remembering what I'd seen in the telescope and take me out and put it on the paper, you see, and went back again. That was the best asset I think I ever had in my life.
This was a way of training you to observe it.
And my first headmaster, the same I've talked about a few moments ago, when as a boy of 17 I took a class for history on Cromwell, I finished up that lesson. He came into the lesson and sat at the back, and he was one of these chaps, an awe-inspiring fellow, because he stood about 6'4" high. He weighed about 18 stone, so he never had any difficulty in controlling the classes at school. And when I'd finished the lesson, I opened a book to read a short extract from Fairfax's diary. Now, Fairfax was Cromwell's leading general. And I read this, and I can see him getting up now and coming towards me. His hands were twice the size of mine. Came to me, shut the door, and said, "Mr. Alcock, I never want to see you use a book again." So from then on, right from then on, I learned all my lessons in history, geography and everything else all off by heart. I don't know what the modern generation of teachers would think. They'd be frightened to death, because they just say open the book and read so-and-so, don't they? But it was, so all the life. So I was able to draw everything on the blackboard, or every map, every country in the world I would draw on the blackboard, everything I drew. So
is the memory that you've got, is it a skill that you've developed, or is it one you've acquired and it's special to you?
I think it's both, but I think largely it was due to the strict nature that we had in those days for teaching. Yes, actually, I mean, I'm amazed now that I could take a class of 30-year-olds and do everything on the board straight off. You know, draw everything on the board straight off. Because when I finished up teaching, I had 6 blackboards. Nobody has a blackboard now, but I had 6 blackboards with coloured chalks, all drawn on the board, and they could go from one or the other around the room.
So although you were interested in astronomy and using your small telescope to plot sunspots and making early observations of the moon with this chap's refractor, had you really started to make any systematic observations as a young boy, or was it more just looking round to see what interested you? It was until about 1934, 3 years after, or 4 years after I'd had that refractor. But already, see, I was caught up with the meteor observing. So meteor observing immediately took first place. And it was only the sun and one or two other things, and the planets. But I remember that
I don't know whether the modern observer thinks he can, the moment he puts his eye to the telescope, he can draw the markings on Mars or something like that, because I didn't see any markings on Mars with any confidence until about 3 or 4 years after I'd been using the telescope.
Yeah.
And the same with Jupiter. I didn't see any detail worth. And then suddenly it came.
Yeah.
Suddenly it came. I could see the snow cap, the polar caps on Mars, and the Maria and those sort of things. I could see them quite well. But at first, no, it was very difficult, disappointing at times to be able to see anything.
When did you first see a comet through the telescope?
Well, there was a comet which we've just been able to trace by Roy Panther's worked its position out. It was about 1929 was the first comet that I saw. It was near Triangulum and Aries, and if you look back in the book, you'll find there was a comet just about that time in that part of the sky. It was about a 7th magnitude comet with a short tail, and it wasn't until really after the war that I began to take up any other observing except meteor work. We came back before the war, you see. We concentrated solely not on counting meteors, but on trying to get the radiant and working out the exact position of beginning and end from these two base stations, you see, 70 miles apart, and anybody else who came in as well. But it was usually me and him. We were the main contributors. Panther joined us after the war, so we had a 3-line base. But we concentrated solely on radiance and meteor speeds and the beginning and end, because we were up against a lot of problems. We were up against a problem that Denning had got. He believed in stationary radiance, which we knew right from the very start, we felt didn't exist. And then we were up against the Shapley and his group of observers who decided to spend a year in the Arizona desert with some special mirror apparatus to find out whether the meteors that entered our atmosphere were either hyperbolic, in other words, coming from interstellar space, or whether they were ecliptic and parabolic, which in other words they were members of the solar system. Well, they came out immediately with the idea. They had 330 clear nights out of 365, and of course the amount of material they got against what we could get here was amazing. And they came out with that 90% of the meteors were hyperbolic. Well, this was entirely against us. And then Porter, Dr. J.G. Porter, took up computing our results because we couldn't cope with what we were getting. I used to go over at weekends to Stowmarket to help him work out paths that of meteors. And if I used to go out Friday night, and if it was a clear night, we worked all night outside, and then we slept for about 3 hours, and then we started computing. And if it was a bad night, we went on computing right through the next night, keeping ourselves going with black coffee. And I used to return home on the 2 o'clock train, just about whacked, you see, because we'd been up all night. But we were all sure that the meteors were most of them were part of our solar, were going around the sun in our solar system. But of course, with all that material, nobody believed us. And then Denning, with his stationary radiance and all the rest of it, he had a reputation lasted about 50 years because nobody believed us on that either. And it is curious that I have just received from the Royal Astronomical Society a paper which tells us that at last we were on the right track.
And that was this week?
This week, just come this week. From the, so there we are. So then after the war, we had quite a system of group, about 5 or 6 of us, Ridley Panther, Goodman, 1 or 2. I've had a letter from Goodman this week too, and so on. And we carried on till about 1949, 1950, when we were asked to go to Jodrell Bank because they were picking up stuff day and night with their equipment, with their radar equipment, and they wanted to know really what we were really doing, you see. So one or two of us went to General Bank, but we knew from the start that they weren't interested in us at all, really. They were just putting up with us for the time being. So I went over, I stayed for a couple of nights, that's about all, and came back again, much to the apprentice's horror that I returned. But it was unfortunate. It came after the best Perseid maximum we've ever had, and I went immediately after this Perseid maximum. I recorded 750 meteors during the Perseid maximum period, and we had aurora every night as well. So they were reported as well. And then I went to Switzerland for a fortnight. Well, nothing worse than seeing these meteors, writing them all up before I went to Switzerland. Then going to Switzerland, then going into a field at General Bank where nobody was really interested. I'm afraid I wasn't very happy over that. But we realised, and slowly Prentice came to realise that the competition from General Bank was putting us out of business, because they could observe bad weather, fine weather, day and night. In fact, they were getting daylight streams, weren't they? They were getting meteor radiance which are near the sun in daylight, the Taurids up there in the summertime. And I think the last real major watch I made was January the 3rd, 1951. I think it was 51, I don't think it was 52, 51, when I observed from a quarter past 5 that January evening, and I finished at 5 minutes to 7 the next morning. And during that period I observed for about 11 hours and 50 minutes, and I think that was the longest watch that was ever made in this country. But I'm told that the Spaniards have beaten it, but I believe they've shared the night in groups. I mean, I'm sure not one of them observed the whole time. Yes. And so then of course came the moment when Dr. Merton, who was then director of the comet section, actually sent me a position of a comet discovered by Parasdusakova, the Czechoslovak astronomers, on the Tatra mountains of Czechoslovakia. They discovered this nova in Delphinus, this comet in Delphinus, and it was a beautiful little comet. I mean, it had a big tail, a very bright coma, and it really was a beautiful comet. And I realised, the moment I saw it in that binocular telescope upstairs at 25 times 105, I knew instantly that I would have found it had I been looking. So I didn't sort of straight away. I said to my father, I said, look, have I got to pack up astronomy? Because I said, we're not getting anywhere. So he said, if I were you, he said, I wouldn't. Although he wasn't greatly interested, so he said, I think you've done enough in astronomy to find another field. So really, I started, and it was the only New Year's resolution that I've ever made and kept in my life, and that was on January the 1st, 1953. I started comet sweeping with a 4-inch refractor.
That was the beginning.
That was the beginning.
Can we cut it there? You actually enjoyed your school there, isn't it? It's obviously led to a career as a teacher. Did you choose that specifically, or?
No, I didn't choose that career. As a matter of fact, it so happened I was marking time in the council school, and I'd reached because in those days they put you up in the council school according to your ability, and I'd already spent 2 years in the top class, so I was just marking time when my mother, who was a private dressmaker, was making dresses for various people, because they used to have their dresses made personally in those days, and she was making dresses for the headmaster's wife at the grammar school, and she said, would it be possible for me to go to the grammar school? Would it be? Now I was 13 then, and children have been at the grammar school since the age of 7, so it was going to be pretty hard, but she would only let me go to the grammar school provided I promised to become a teacher. And that was why I went to the grammar school, because I agreed to go to the grammar school on those conditions, because we were very, very poor. My father was a railway examiner, which you irreverently call wheel tappers, and he was only earning about £2, 5 shillings a week in old money, and he had 3 boys to bring up, you see. Of course, my mother, of course, made dresses, so that made a little bit better. But I had to pay to go to the grammar school. You see, so I didn't go till I was 14. I was only there 3 years. So, of course, I had great difficulty in catching up on the work that had been done before, because I'd never done any language other than English, and I'd never seen any trigonometry, geometry or algebra before. So it so happened that every year in February, when we had the half-year examination, I pretty well failed in every subject. And in those days they didn't put "he's trying hard," they just put "he's failed." They said you straight away. But in the summer, by the end of the summer examination in June, July, I had caught up, you see. So in the years that I was at the grammar school, I always got the progress prize for the whole school, because my marks must have been like a yo-yo, going up and down, you see, just like that. So, and then I owe that headmaster the fact that I got a grammar school career. When he was at college in the distant past, his real friend was the principal of the City of Leeds Training College. So he put in a word for me to go to the City of Leeds Training College, and I spent my 2 years at the City of Leeds Training College. And the principal also had a 4-inch Cook refractor in his garden, and it wasn't. One of the questions when I went on the interview, the first one was a Lancashire. We went in 3 together. In this enormous room, 50-foot square. He was a little chap who sat in that corner, and the secretary sat in the other corner, and we sat on a chair in the middle, 3 chairs in the middle of the room. And I wondered which order. The first one who went in for the interview, he was a Lancastrian, so he got a real Lancastrian accent, you see. And he was asked, well, some questions on maths. He couldn't answer them. So he said, shelf number so-and-so, book number so-and-so along there, look it up. Then the next chap went in, and he was interested in French. So he couldn't answer a French question, so he said, look at the book so-and-so on there. When it came to my turn, I wondered what the dickens was going to happen. Astronomy. So we clicked. So he knew. He asked me all sorts of questions on 20 questions on astronomy. And there was one I didn't know. So when I went to college, he used to. A secretary used to come. Mr. Alcock is wanted by the principal in the middle of a lecture, and I used to go out and answer a few questions in his room when he was ready. So that's how I got. Well, then of course, the Labour Party in government for that brief period had accepted about several hundred more students at training colleges because they were going to raise the school leaving age, which they never did. And so, of course, when the time came for me to have a permanent job, I couldn't get one because there were so many surplus, you see. And it wasn't until 5 years after
your training,
that training, when I was only doing jobs here and jobs there, making money drawing and even working in the sugar beet factory, sugaring sugar and things like that, that I got a permanent job. And the funny thing was, the chairman of the managers was the headmaster of the grammar school. And it was more or less cut and dried that the job was mine, because I'd been on no end of interviews, and the moment you went to an interview you knew who was going to get the job. They were all cut and dry, and I had no sympathy from these other chaps at all, because my turn had come after 5 years. It wasn't until 1937 that I got a permanent job. And then of course I was called up
Yeah, well,
See,
that was an interruption in your life, was it, George? Or was it a time that you enjoyed?
well, as far as I was concerned, it never bothered me. Yes, I made a point of even enjoying that job.
Yeah.
Because, and I know that when we went to Blackpool,
Yeah.
and it was all the wireless up. I applied to go in the Met Office because I'd already been sending weather observations to the Met Office. So I applied to go into the Met. Well, obviously, we suspected that if you do anything, they didn't want you in the same job because they might, so they pushed me in signals.
Yeah.
And we went to Blackpool to learn Morse. And we did it all in Woolworths at Blackpool. That's where we did it all. All the counters in Woolworths had got hundreds of keys on them. We learned Morse. We learned up to half-hour course there to 12 words a minute at Blackpool. And I could never understand all the time we were at Blackpool. Well, they were bombing and dropping shells and bombs and all the rest of it on Manchester and Liverpool. We could see them. We could see them every night. They never touched Blackpool because they could have pretty well wiped out half the future Yes, but the airmen, the rookies would have all been wiped out, but they never touched us at all. Then I went down to Compton Bassett in Wiltshire, and we had another 3 months or so down there when we went up to about 18 words a minute, which is about 100 figures a minute. And then I was married from there. And then, at the end of my service, when I was passed out at Blackpool, they had them at Compton Bassett. So when they lined us all up on the Barratt Square, 300 or 400 of us, which were going to post off to various quarters. And they started, for the only time in my service career, they started with the Zs. And they worked to the A's, you see. So I could hear them coming along, you see, and I could hear, as they got near, I could hear them saying, "You come from Aberdeen, right, we'll post you to Penzance," or somewhere like that. Or "You live in Kent, right, we'll post you up to the north of Scotland," you see, and I could see that. And I was the last man on the Barrack Square, the very last one. And they said to me, Polebrook's in Snowdonia, isn't it?" And I looked suitably sad about it, knowing that it was 10 miles off my house. You see, they didn't know because the aerodrome hadn't been opened up. You see, it was going to be an American base for these flying fortresses. You see, so I went to Polebrook. So for 9 months I was at Polebrook, going backwards and forwards at Polebrook. I had a bike, so I used to come home and I worked a shift system at Polebrook. And it was very interesting at Polebrook because we were dealing with Bomber Command, and I was the first wireless operator to receive messages from the first flight, daylight flight, because these were flying in daylight, these flying fortresses, and I was the one who received their call signs as they came over the coast. Of course they were silent, of course, when they went out, but when they got back over the coast, the call sign came up and I was able to write the call sign, and these chaps were all around me, "Oh, so-and-so's okay, so-and-so's okay," and then they began to look very sad because they, one by one, they knew they weren't coming back, and they were on the next operation, you see, because only about half ever returned, you see, from these flights. Only about half ever returned from these flights there. So it was interesting, and also you met such people as Clark Gable, and the husband of Janet MacDonald. He was a very nice chap. He was. We were often on night duty together, and he produced some of the most marvellous pictures of the musicals they were in. With all the chorus. Oh, they were really wonderful. And then suddenly I found out there was an American Met station on the. So I asked him if he would get in contact. Could I go and see the? So I did. And I used to go regularly when I was off duty, go across there to see, for the first time, some weather maps other than my own, you see. I never saw any before that. And so, then the time came when I went overseas. And I went up north we went from Greenock in the Clyde. And then we went right out in the Atlantic. and I had an old school atlas, and I could see the plough, and by timing the pointers underneath the pole star, I could work out how far west we were,
yeah.
see, and how high we were, how far north we were, because the pole star's 5 degrees apart,
yeah.
and I could see the sea horizon,
yeah.
so I could see the latitude and the longitude. And we went out to 22 degrees west, and then we turned south-southeast to Gibraltar, and I was the only one on board who knew where we were. And then the chaps began to gather around me, you see, and the officer in our room said he put up with this for a bit, and then he said he went to the captain of the ship, and all he got back from the captain of the ship, he's too healthy, too near to be healthy. So I knew we were approaching Gibraltar, you see, because I made these plots on these maps, you see. Wonderful, I thought that was. We were the first radar unit in North Africa, and after we'd been in Algiers for a few days, they pushed us up the coast by a very fast ship that was being used by us. We grabbed this. It was from the Hook of Holland Harwich service. It'd just been brought. It was a brand new boat put in, and we went up to Bone, which was then now is called Anabar. It was the most foremost port, and they put us in a tobacco factory for the night there, and we stayed there for a bit until things began to get a bit hot, because we were getting fragments of our own guns, shells coming down on this roof. So we went out into the country, and then we set up this unit about 14 miles east of Anabar. That's towards the enemy lines, because they were in Bizerta. That was their main port, was in Bizerta. And I remember that first night they came over, and they came over with great regularity, about every 3 hours. They came from Sardinia, so it was only a short flight across to bomb this port, you see. Well, then we had to set up this radar unit, and they hadn't got a compass. Now, I'd got a compass and a pocket barometer, which I'd bought before I went overseas. A jolly good compass, which is in the cupboard upstairs, and a pocket barometer. So I had to set up this unit, get it the right base, you see. And on the first night, they must have been surprised. They must have, what the dickens is that? We shot down 6 aircraft on the first night that we set this up. In Sardinia, they must have wondered what the dickens had happened. I mean, they'd had complete control. They could come what they like, you see, till we shot these down. And that wing commander who was working with me, he got shot down later in Arnhem. He finished in Arnhem when we went over in Arnhem, because he was moved over there. But shortly, the moment we set this equipment up, we had some high brass hats from the RAF came up. We hadn't set this up in the right place. We hadn't got it the right. Now, could we have set it up without getting it right? But their main problem was that it was far too near the domestic site. So if the enemy aircraft discovered where this radar unit was, they'd probably blow the whole of us to smithereens. Whereas if they moved it 1.5 miles up the road, they'd only hit half of us. See, so that was so that was the perk. So I had to set it all up again. And I worked 14 hours with those two now, because I was the only chap who could work 14 hours, because I've been used to working day and night, you see. And I got dysentery. And immediately I didn't know I was so ill. But I was sent to the military hospital down the road. Beautiful weather, gorgeous weather, tented site, you know. Got there and it started to rain. And it rained and it rained and rained when I was in this hospital. And the water became a foot deep under the beds.
My God.
It was foot deep under the beds. And the chaps were dying of double pneumonia all around me. Some chaps had come from the front with shell shock, you see, because they'd been right up in the front. They were shot. They were all army types. I was the only RAF bloke there in the place, you see. And I know that how I survived, I don't know. So I was there about 8 to 9 weeks in this hospital. I must have lost about 4 stone. I was there. And then they lined us up and said, "You're feeling all right now, aren't you? You're okay," and all the rest of it. But they didn't send me back to my unit, which was only about 3 or 4 miles down the road. I had to go back to Algiers on the train. 450 miles on the train. And I went back to Algiers, and then when I got to Algiers, they couldn't understand why I wanted to go back to my unit, because they knew it was hot up in the front there, see, with the most forward base. I said, well, all my equipment's up there. So I took the train journey back to this unit. See, and the funny thing was that the medical officer who passed me as fit, thinking I would go any other unit round there, passed me as fit and sent me off back to my unit.
Yeah.
When after the war I had to have an insurance, I had to have a medical.
Yeah.
It was the same chap.
George.
He didn't recognise me, but I recognised him. And so I told him where I'd met him.
Yeah.
Yes, isn't it amazing? Coincidences like that all my life. I've had coincidences like that. But I'm sorry, we got way off astronomy here, haven't we?
Were you able to do any astronomy in your...
Well, yes, I did to a point, because the chaps on this small unit, there was about 70 of us on this unit.
Yeah.
They found out that I could talk about all sorts of subjects of interest. So instead of going to bed, several of them used to talk with me under the stars at night about all sorts of subjects as well, you see. And I made one or two small cardboard telescopes with lenses and all sorts of things, which they used. But often we talked right through the night till 3 o'clock in the morning, because they were fed up with me. Yeah. And then they decided to clear off, you see, to bed. So I did quite a bit of meteor work there, and of course I did quite a bit on the Acrids while I was there, and I sent these observations back to Prentice, but of course I could only count them like they're doing now.
Yeah.
And when I see how difficult it was for us to do radiant work, and in that same magazine which has just been published, there's an article on the Leonids.
Yes.
And we always said that there wasn't point radiance. Yeah. And there's not a point radiant even in the Leonids, which that was the only one that everybody was certain was a point radiant. But there's a drawing in that journal which shows that so the Perseids hadn't got a point radiant, but everybody else trying to make out the Perseids. Well, the Perseids have quite a large radiant of about 5 or 6 degrees at least, which we knew about, you see. And it's only just been recognised now. But when I see the results of the Meteor section now, which are published in the Astronomer and in the other magazines, they're able to say there was one meteor from the southern Acrids, there were 2 meteors from well, you know perfectly well it's quite impossible, because there are quite a lot of meteors like there are radiants in Cassiopeia, radiants in Taurus, radiants in Andromeda at the same time as the Perseids. But now everything comes from the Perseids, I'll bet, on their list. You see?
Right there, Martin. Conversant in radar and Morse, and you were making MET readings, and round us in the room here we can see all your MET reading data here. What do you do today with this?
Well, at the end of the war, I was sufficiently conversant, because by accident I got into signals. Yeah. So I was able to take all my weather information by Morse, and I had to do that until I got a radio teleprinter in the other room, and in 1975 I got this radio teleprinter, so that cut out the absolute essential using of Morse. Yeah. But I still take it once a week to keep my hand in, or at least once a week. And then I was able to obtain this fax machine, which was only advertised once by a firm at Oxford. It was only advertised once in the weather magazine, and so, but anyway, I saw that it would be very helpful, because it plots maps and everything, you see. So I got that. And then recently, on another, only once it appeared in the Geographical Journal, the first Geographical Journal I've been asked to get was advertising that equipment. Yeah. And I was able to get that equipment just under a year ago, just about September the 17th, I think it was last year I got that equipment, and it's now recently been updated.
So this one downloads maps from satellites and gives you a visual display of the cloud cover for the whole of Europe, North Africa and the UK.
Half the hemisphere, the hemisphere facing the actual satellite, appears on that screen. some of the pictures, of course, are a good deal better than others because it depends on what time you're taking it. In other words, in about another 10 minutes, a better picture will come up than there's on there now.
So these pictures we're seeing here are coming down the line every few minutes.
Every few minutes, day and night. It's on all the time.
So you're able to use these pictures to see whether you're going to be clear.
That is the purpose of the whole thing. That's the purpose of the whole thing. All this equipment is nothing else than that. Because in the old days, when we were doing meteor work, it was necessary for us to know whether it was clear at both stations. Yeah. And there was no information to that effect we could get. So that's what, in 1933, I started making weather observations, and I used to send a forecast to Stowmarket because the post office then had a system which is now defunct. Yeah. They had a system whereby I could make my meteor observations during the night, write them up at 7 o'clock in the morning, take them down on my bicycle to the General Post Office in Peterborough, and they were delivered under an express system, which was 3/8 for the letter and 6 extra for this express. And it was taken by a telegraph boy to the railway station, put on the train. Stowmarket received this, and he was phoned from the station master at Stowmarket. He collected it about 12 o'clock, put in the reply back, and I got his reply by express letter at my house at 5 o'clock every night. Now that system is gone, absolutely gone. In fact, it was a wonderful system because you saw it in writing, you saw everything in writing, and I was able to forecast, as I thought, the conditions for the next night. Yeah. You see, and he was able to. So I said, because we used to waste a dickens of a lot of time. Sometimes, yes, not only that, I'd be clear, and he'd be cloudy at Stowmarket, only 70 miles away, it'd be cloudy. The whole of my work was wasted. Yeah. Well, it was his business. He was a solicitor, so he had his own firm. But I was teaching the next morning, you see. And I assure you, if you go in the front of a class of 60 and you look 3 parts asleep, they soon find out. But they never did. I never had any trouble over that at all.
So for the equipment you've got here now, then you're taking these readings every day and then seeing whether you're going to be clear in the early hours of the morning or in the evening.
Yes,
and this helps you make your searches.
Yes, it says, shall I observe first thing in the evening or shall I observe later on in the night, you see, and things like that. In the last few nights I've been observing as soon as it got dark, and then last thing before dawn, you see.
I suppose that having got all this equipment together, you're actually intrinsically interested in weather systems as well, aren't you?
Oh yes, all the time. I'm as much interested, in fact, I'm probably more interested in the weather than I'm in astronomy, you see. Yes. Because after all these years, I know a fair amount about how to forecast now, you see.
And what about the TV weather forecasts?
I'm afraid I don't look at them at all, hardly. I think their forecast in general are not too bad, but they have no idea how to forecast for cloud abouts at all. No idea at all.
So the rest of us who are trying to rely on them should just ring you up in Central, did you?
Well, they do. People do ring me up, especially the farming community used to, but they don't do now, but they used to. Farmers used to ring me up frequently, ask me what the weather was going to be, but they don't now, they've given it up. Probably they've all died by now and finished off, where I'm still carrying on. Yeah.
So how long does it take you to take these weather readings during the day then? Are you doing it at one sitting or do you come back many times?
Well, with this equipment, of course, it's all printed out. It will be printed out shortly. About 20 minutes past 2 is the next weather map that comes out. I don't know what the time is at the moment.
It's 20 to 2.
Well, that's right. Well, in another half an hour you can get on there, you see. And that gives the Western Europe ones on there. And then at 5 o'clock in the evening it gives all the isobars and that right across the Atlantic to the American coast. But normally I take Morse now, because this Morse that's coming over now comes from Germany. Yeah. There's no British station left for Morse at all. There's only one station really in Europe which transmits Morse. And I take it because I've got a few friends who've got relatives over in the United States. Yeah. So I give them the weather 2 or 3 times a day. I haven't taken it on here, you see. Yeah. Yes. So that's what I do with the Morse. But it will take teleprinter stuff as well. I can switch it on and show you a teleprinter if you like. But I'll have to tune the station in for a start.
What's that we're hearing now, George?
This is coming from Bracknell.
This is Morse?
No, this is actually... No, that's not Morse at all. I don't think it'll be dark enough for you to take it. Oh, it's on the wrong... Wait a minute, it's on the wrong thing. Okay. Yeah, that's getting old, that is. Lost a few of the bars. No, it's not doing it. Okay, I'll switch off. It doesn't do it at times unless it's I've got this. See, I've been taking pictures as well, and you need a different control. It should come out purely in figures in a minute. Sorry, not doing it properly. I'm sure I'm on the right. Oh, I'm not on the right band, that's why. It's okay, I can see why it's not. Right, it should do it now. I wonder if it's got a sort of memory, this. It waits till the end of the line. The other one in the front room prints figures out one by one. But I don't think they're dark enough. I ought to put another tape in.
I know you said, George, that you're a simple man and you only use the binoculars to observe with, but really this is part of your observing equipment, and this is high tech.
Yeah.
Most people wouldn't really recognise.
No. Right, is that enough of that?
Yeah.
Now, I can... That's Morse.
That's Morse. Are you able to read this, are you? They've stopped. They're going to send the call sign. Actually, if I did it in pen, do you want it at all?
Do you want it?
I think we've got enough of that now, George.
Right.
That'll be okay. Okay, we'll put that.
Yes, there is.
Oh, is it?
Yes, there is.
Sorry.
I can see it.
Well, George, whether consciously or unconsciously, you seem to prepare the ground very well for making your searches at new objects like comet and novae. Was there any specific point where you decided that you were going to begin a search, and what sort of inspiration did you need to make the start?
Well, you see, astronomy has never been an object since I started in the meteor section. It's never been an object just to make observations and do nothing. We aimed at obtaining first class information. And I knew that no comets had been found in this country since Denning's of 1894, and I thought there was a possibility. And then when that comet turned up in Delphinus in 1951, I knew there was a possibility of finding them. And I didn't think anybody other than the Czechs in Western Europe were making any comprehensive searches for comets, so I decided to take that up. Astronomy's never been ever just looking around the sky and just looking at things in the telescope. I've had to have a reason for doing it.
Yeah.
And that reason had to be that I was going to get some information worth presenting to anybody to improve the situation.
I know that you've always said that W.F. Denning was something of a mentor to you, and that your achievements in astronomy have really mirrored it about 50 years later.
I think rather it's Prentice that put me on the field. I did say that when I went to the first meteor section meeting in 1931 at Sion College on the Victoria Embankment, where the BAA used to have their meetings, I was, during the course of the afternoon, they had to we stood in silence for Denning, who had just died. And there was a little lady, elderly lady, probably, I didn't know at the time, but nearing 90, Grace Cook, who had been the director of the meteor section when Prentice first started observing in the 1920s. And she whispered to me in the corner of the room, "You are going to take the place of W.F. Denning." And when I look back, I think, well, I don't know how true that could have been.
Yeah.
Because he found 5 comets and I've now found 5. I'm hoping one day I might even get another one to break his record.
I don't doubt it.
And then he found the nova in 1920 in Cygnus. So after I'd been observing when the meteor section work was slowly going out because it was useless, I decided to do comet sweeping. But after 3 years of comet sweeping, I knew perfectly well the chances of finding another comet in this country with the climate that we've got was very little. So I decided to have another string to my bow. And so then I thought I'd try, never thinking I'd ever be able to do it, try nova sweeping. Now, I had read a paper by an astronomer who was working in Australia. I've got the paper